All right, welcome to the Adobe Photoshop workshop. I'm recording this in case you are not able to make it, if you have like a different time schedule, or if the network ends up having problems and we end up just having bandwidth issues. So I want to start out with my little cheat sheet here. If you go to this link, it will take you to this page, and I'll be referencing some of the things on this. This is as much my notes as it is really anything else. It includes like some of the things I want to cover, as well as like some references. If you look at the very last page, this ends up being a series of references. And there's like some really good stuff here. Like there is this edX Adobe uh, digital careers. This is a full year long curriculum that with your Adobe login, you can like log into it, but you can also like pull different parts of it. If you want to do a module on Photoshop, you can find a module in here. But this is also for your learning, or like really any of your students can do this. These are organized around tasks like graphic design or video editing, that sort of thing. Um, and they have a tendency to use like sort of an overlapping collection of the Adobe suite. And then there's a nice link here that will take you to some real or to the connected tutorials. I'll show you that again a little bit later, as well as this link, which is to the 960 page Photoshop, full Photoshop reference. I'm going to put this up here in the upper right hand corner so that you can continue to see the link. It's not very well centered, that's okay. Let's see if I can get that a little bit in the page a little bit better so that it's just totally visible. I will try to, like I said, I'll be referencing this during my presentation. So what I have here is the Adobe Creative Cloud, and this is the Cloud Manager. And what I want you to see here is that this ends up being a really useful tool because it will let you like have immediate access to anything that you have installed. It'll tell you what you have installed, but it'll also let you then choose additional pieces from the Adobe suite to bring in. And it is really as simple as pushing a button, but there's a couple of other things that I want to show you in here. So we're going to be going into Photoshop here, right? Notice I have a couple of updates up here, right? I am not making these updates. I may make these updates before I actually run the workshop. A lot of that depends on like how long it's going to take. But when you're using this, you have the option of running the updates. And the rule of thumb is never update in the middle of a project because you don't know if something's going to change in terms of the functionality or the interface. But I could launch the update by just clicking here. So looking then at my applications, one of the things that I want you to see here is that these like three little dots here next to the open button will take you to like learn more, which is the collection of the the tutorials again. And so they have it organized by like sort of like basic editing, um, making selections, using layers, and these end up being like sort of the very basic things for Photoshop. That's great. In addition to that, there's one more little thing in here that we want to see before we lodge, which is if you did manage to accidentally update and you realize you need to roll back, like maybe the function of something has changed and it's just taking you a long time to figure out how to do it or how to work with it, you can click here and this will let you roll back to any of the versions of Photoshop that you've had on here recently. Um, so certainly I could roll back to the last one that I had, which was 21.2.2, right? And reinstall it. Very useful, totally worth the price of admission. So this is then one way that you can end up loading Photoshop. So I'm going to go ahead and load it through this. Go ahead and just hitting this button here. With my multiple screens, it will often load in another screen, which is pretty common. So, which is what is done here. So this is Photoshop, and one of the things you'll notice is that my Photoshop looks a little bit different probably than yours does. And I'm going to tell you how I got this. So the default function of Photoshop, or the default loading function of Photoshop right now, is to load and to show you the recent files that you've used. I don't like that. I like to just jump right into Photoshop. But if you want to, so if you want to control this, if you come into Photoshop and then Preferences, in here we have, there's like way too many preferences. Okay. And to be honest with you, I forget where this is. Um, let's see here. So let me take a quick look. Yes, here it is. Auto show the home screen. I've simply unclicked that. Um, this is worth a little bit of your time to take a look at and try to like sort of work through just a tiny bit. Um, because there are preferences here that affect the color of it, like whether it's in dark mode, the way that the workspace is set up, the way that the tools operate. And frequently, when there's like an update to Photoshop, uh, they will change the way something functions. Usually there is a way to roll it back or to change it back to the way that you want it in here. Okay, but these things affect everything from performance, like how much memory you're giving over to Photoshop, to like where your scratch disks are, to like the types of cursors that you're using. And this is something that I go into a little bit more in the intermediate Photoshop, but it is nice to know that all of this is here and available for you. Okay, so let's start. Let's create a new Photoshop file. Let me get this here. So this is like, I don't know, a little bit precise about these things, right? Um, so one way to do this is to come in here and tell Photoshop and then New. Um, Now the nice thing about this is that it brings up this other loading screen here, right? And it gives you the options of like what kind of a file you want to use. So you can go and open your save files. You can do a photo. Notice that the photo has like, certain dimensions to it. These are common image dimensions, like or printed photo dimensions. Most of these are at 300 pixels per inch. You could do print. I'm going to go ahead and go into letter size. That's kind of like one of the defaults that I use for these things. Notice that it is 8.5 by 11 inches. You can choose to do it in portrait or landscape. That's entirely up to you. And the default resolution is 300 pixels per inch. The reason for this is that this ends up being a good solid resolution to print out on a laser printer. You can also modify the color mode. RGB is perfect for this, honestly. And if you're not doing stuff that's going off to a professional printer, this is probably exactly what you need. Again, I'll talk a little bit more about the color modes in the intermediate Photoshop. So let's go ahead and create this file. And you'll notice that it pops up with like sort of what looks like a standard sheet of paper. There's a couple things I want you to see in here. Like for example, you can see that like I have been using some other colors. If I want to reset that, I can click on this button up here. And what this will do is this will reset to my black and white uh, colors for foreground and background color. You have a couple of tool menus here, right? So you have one tool menu that sort of stretches down this side, and then you have like these other like tabs that have these other tools in them. Now what these are is these end up being like tools from Photoshop Windows, right? So and these you can pull them off, you can arrange them around anywhere that you want to on your screen. If you have two monitors like I do, you might be able to like sort of like take and drag one over to some other place and be able to uh, use it that way. This lets you have like a lot of control once you know what you're doing, once you know what the tools are that you're using. But there are some really basic defaults for this. If you come up to Window and go into Workspace, you'll see that I'm set on currently on the Essentials. All right. There is also 3D, motion, painting, photography, and graphic and web. Now, if we switch to graphic and web here, you'll notice there was like a little bit of a loading screen there, right? And then it brings up a particular sort of setup. Now, what this is doing is this is focusing on the tools that they think you're going to most use for doing graphic design and web. I generally leave this at Essentials, but something I want to show you is notice that this actually remembered where all of these other windows were. Now, perhaps you've closed a couple of windows and you're like, oh my gosh, what do I do to get them back? If you're ever looking for a window in Photoshop or a palette, first place to do it is to look is to come up and look under windows. And anything that is checked is already visible. So it's like if you want something else, you can actually choose it. Now, what will happen is it will pop up in here and it'll turn up as being available on this other additional navigation bar here, right? And you can save that, or you can like leave that there. But if like say you've like rearranged the space, maybe you don't know where everything is, uh, there is this option for Workspace Reset Essentials. And what this will do is this will bring back the palettes to the way they were at the beginning, right? And you'll notice that I had actually closed a couple of things already on this. So this is what the essentials look like. You've got your Learn tab over here, and so this is yet another way to reach the Photoshop tutorials. I generally close this or at least minimize it, because I'm really jealous of my screen real estate. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a look at some of the things I wanted to show you. Let's um, Let's start by putting something into here. So what I want to do is I want to just grab an image, and this can be any image that you have, any image that you have laying around. I have a couple of images that I was using for a web design project, and I'm just going to take and just going to drag it directly into Photoshop, and I want to show you what the behavior is. Now notice that when you do this, it has this gigantic X through it. What that means is that Photoshop is trying to just place this in the screen. And what it wants you to do is to choose like where you want to put it. Now, the thing you have to be aware of with this is that this is not paying attention to the resolution of the image. So when you're trying to import an image and you're putting it onto a sheet of paper like this, if I go ahead and import this, it will probably look good in Photoshop at this level, but it may not look good when I actually print it. So I don't recommend that you do this to import an image. I would say that the best way to do it is to actually take and load it in. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this. I'm going to hit the delete key to delete that layer. Notice that it brought it in as a layer. I'm going to do File and then Open. The other way I could do this is if I right-clicked on the image and then told it to load it in Photoshop. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. All right, so now what I want you to notice is that it loads it in a new tab, and we see like end to end, left to right, top to bottom, everything. If you come into this part of the menu in the lower left-hand corner, and you control click, or in my case it's command click, what this will do is this will show you the height and width of the image. Oh, it looks like I've got this set for tiles. This is probably a setting in general that I'm going to have to want to go back and fix. Let's see. The problem with this is there's so many things here, right? I'm going to probably have to look this up later. Generally speaking, though, if you do this, it will show you the dimensions of the file. If for some reason you've screwed it up like I have, and you don't know what you're doing there, you can always come in and look at image size under image size. Of course, it opens it in a new window. And this will show you the actual dimensions of this. So this is like 1700 pixels by 1300 pixels, right? So when in putting this into a full sheet of paper, this is not nearly as large. I can show you that by taking and selecting the whole image, and that's by Command or Control A, and then I can do copy or Command C, and then tell it to come in here and edit Control V. So notice when I copied the image and pasted it in here, it came in here at a different size. That means then that this is the actual size. Let's see if this is actually functioning. No, I'm gonna have to definitely fix this. This did actually give us the general size of it, but then it breaks it down into like these square tiles, and then tells you the number of tiles that it is, width by height, which is not quite as convenient for me. Okay, so I have this image, I've brought it in. This is at the original image size. Notice that it is on a new layer. I can use my move tool by either clicking on it um, and then selecting and dragging this. Also notice that when I mouse over the move tool, it the text pops up and it tells me what the name of the tool is, but it also tells me what the keyboard shortcut is for it, right? This is very useful because keyboard shortcuts end up being the way that we modify or that we end up using Photoshop the most. All right. So I wanted to talk about then the magnifying tool and the hand tool, the zoom tool and the hand tool. If you double click on the zoom tool, what you get is that the file zooms into 100%. And you can see because the zoom number is listed here in the lower left-hand corner. If I hit the V key then, I can then go ahead and move the file inside of here. What this is letting you do is see just about every pixel that's in here. If on the other hand, you double click on the hand tool, this zooms out so that you can see the entire image. And this is really useful if you're if you want to see like how things are laid out sort of in the space of the image, right? Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and go down my list here. So I guess the next thing we want to look at really quickly is the crop tool. So by selecting the crop tool, notice that it puts like a border around the edge of the image, a border that I can actually then take and grab. So I can take and grab this and tell this that I want to select a certain part of the image. Notice that in this case, it is square. What is going on? Well, my default for this tool is that to select it as a square. So I'm going to go ahead and change this. I can change it to the original ratio of the image itself, or I can give it tell it to go by width and height and so forth. So I'm going to do that. Now, it has numbers in here, so I'm going to quickly delete those and see if I can get like a sort of a free form tool here. Yes. So I'm going to actually zoom in just a little bit here. Now, this is throwing away data. Once I've selected the area that I want to crop to, I can just click the check mark. And I have a new image here. The new image, it does have a different height and width. Oh, what is that? Oh, I see what's going on here. I was holding down the command key when I was pushing this button, and that's why I was getting the weird tiles. If you just click on it, it will tell you the actual width and height of the image itself. Great. I'm going to blame that on something that they changed and not like that was a behavior all the time. But like I said, there is probably a preference that I can change to get it back to this. All right, the next thing I want to talk about is the history window. Now, again, if say for example you don't have this in here, it may be gone. Um, you can always come into this Windows menu and you can look for history, and it will pop it open and it will show you where it is if it's like available as one of the palettes. Now, the history window keeps track of everything that you've done uh, since you've opened it. Um, but be aware that if you save the file, it will not save the history. What this lets you do is this lets you sort of step back through these things if you've made a mistake and look at or go back to any of the previous versions of it. Something you have to be aware of is that this takes up memory, both on your hard disk and in Photoshop as well. So if you find out that you're running out of space, you might want you might want to be aware of this. You can modify the number of steps that this is able to restore. If you have a lot of memory, you might want to boost this. I think that the default for this is 20, and again, that is available in the general preferences. All right, so the last thing I'm going to cover in this is to talk about layers. All right, so layers is one of the most useful things in Photoshop. Looks like they've changed the way that this sort of operates, or the way that this icon here, since my notes. This little button will take and add a new layer to you. Notice that layers stack vertically in your layers tab here. And the way that this works is anything that is on top is viewed before anything that's on the bottom. So it's like looking at layers of acetate. I'm going to go ahead and zoom this in so that it's like full screen here. And then I'm going to take and I'm going to grab a quick little paintbrush. Oh, look at that. That's a gigantic paintbrush, right? I'm going to go ahead and modify the size of it, bring it down to something that's a little bit smaller. And I'm going to try to draw some mustaches on these cats, right? Now, the reason that we work on layers is because this is not destructive. It is drawing on the layer, and it is not drawing on anything that is underneath it. So looking at this, I can turn off the layer and turn it back on again. Uh, and uh, and I can control like what's visible in here if I want to like save a copy of it or send something to it. I can do multiple versions of it. I can do multiple attempts to adjust this as I'm working with it. In addition to that, by using the move tool, I can move the layer around. I can move any layer around. See how I grabbed the layer that was underneath it by accident. And if you actually accidentally make a mistake like that, Control or Command Z will move it back. And this is again a pretty new behavior for Photoshop. I can turn these into eyebrows, right? Uh, the very last thing I want to do is to show you how to save, and then I'm going to be out of this. So this is straightforward as File and then Save. You want to make sure that you give it a nice name. I call it Kitten Demo. And you definitely want to use the Photoshop file format. And the reason you want to use this is because this will retain your layers. I'm going to go ahead and save it. And that will throw that throws then this message, which is like maximize compatibility. This is so that if you're saving it for older versions of Photoshop, those will work. And for this, we are done.